Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third in our three-part series, Job Searching During COVID-19. My name is Katybeth Lee. I'm the Director of Business Career Services at VCU, and today we are going to focus on mastering virtual interviewing and networking. A few just logistical things as we get started. Everybody is muted, but there are going to be ample opportunities to participate using the chat feature and also a couple of polls that we'll be using throughout. You can, if you have any questions, you can either submit them using the chat box to everyone, or you can send them directly to Bryan Rose, who is the co-host of this meeting. He's our Associate Director for Career Education. This is being recorded and it will be available on the VCU School of Business YouTube channel in a week or so. The other sessions are already available. So if you would like to watch week 1, which focused on job search strategy, or week 2, which focused on preparing your documents like your resume and your cover letter, those are available now. And we're going to go ahead and move forward. Thanks everyone for being here. So our agenda today is to focus on how to master virtual interviewing and networking. And those of you who are with us in the first week might remember that I talked quite a bit about this book called The 2-Hour Job Search, and I'll show you the book again as we get to that point. But the importance of networking is really large, especially in a competitive labor market like we have now entered. And so oftentimes you're going to be doing informational interviewing before you even do an interview for a job. And so we're going to cover both of those topics today. We're going to talk both about content and the technology and how you can be prepared for those things. And, you know, really making the most of this sort of virtual world that we're living in right now. So here's your first opportunity to jump in. And I would love to hear from you about your best and worst interviews. So for those of you who have been on interviews that you would categorize as best and worst, and my colleagues, please participate. What's the best and worst interview you've been on? What made it that way and why? And as you're typing, ooh, that's a good one. All right, I'll put them in here and I'm going to reference them in a minute, but I'll tell you about best interview was probably one of my first interviews out of grad school. And it was sort of awkward because we were supposed to be having lunch and an interview at the same time, but we were waiting for someone. She had gotten hung up on the phone. And so we had made a lot of small talk, but we kind of run out of small talk and nobody wanted to ask me actual interview questions because, well, the hiring manager wasn't actually there yet. And so there's this awkward silence. And I just said, well, do you all like riddles? And they were like, sure. And so I started telling them riddles and having them guess the answers to these riddles. And we had such a fun time. And it was a really authentic experience that was kind of outside of the structure of the interview. And I ended up taking that job and working there for almost a decade. And it was a really good way to kind of get to know those people. And I think they saw my authentic self. So that's probably one of my best interview memories. Bryan wrote in here, he was tripped up by the question, what is the most recent book you have read and what did it mean to you? And probably saying like Sports Illustrated didn't count, right? You feel like, what book do you want to know about? We used to ask people what their favorite movie was. And I think one of the reasons we would ask that kind of question is we just kind of want to know what you like and what kind of person you are, and do you want to have the kind of conversation we want to have around the water cooler? So we're going to talk a little bit as we go into this about fit and this concept of fit. So in an interview, they're not only looking at your skills, but they're looking at like, do you fit in? Would we enjoy being together? Equal energy. So Sophia, is equal energy a good thing or a bad thing? I would guess it's a good thing that, you know, if you kind of feel like you're in the same energy place, that can be like a really good interview. Rochelle has a story here about a terrible Zoom interview. for a summer internship. And she had applied to so many places. When she got to the interview, she actually thought she was interviewing with a different school. And she was telling her research about a different place than where she was actually interviewing. Whoops, yep, that would be really awkward. These are great. Thank you all for sharing that. So, you know, interviews can be good, they can be bad, and we're gonna hopefully help you prepare to at least bring your best to the interview, and you certainly cannot control what other people are doing in the interview. So those of you who were with us last week may remember that we talked a little bit about how it's really important as a job seeker to pivot from the mentality of a student. And as a student, you're a service recipient. We are all hired and exist to help you get this great education and achieve your goals. But when you go into the market and you're looking for a job, you're actually in the position of more of a service provider. And so you need to make sure that both as you're preparing your resume and your cover letter, but also as you're interviewing, that you're making everything not about yourself, but about that employer. You may also remember last week we talked about how any open job is a problem for an employer. It means that they have work that needs to be done that nobody is doing. And so the person that they're going to hire is the person that best articulates how they are equipped to solve that problem today. And so as you prepare for an interview, you need to start with this particular problem, meaning this position at this employer at this time, as front of mind. And you're essentially building a case of examples and demonstrated experiences that can show that you're really equipped to solve that problem. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, and we talked about this briefly last week, is that your resume is what gets you the interview, but it's the interview that actually gets you the job. And so your resume typically focuses on skills. When an employer is reviewing that, they're looking to see, do you have these baseline skills? If you get an interview, they think you have the skills based on your resume. And now they want to know, do you fit? Now, when you think about this concept of fit, or you might also hear people talk about like corporate culture or organizational culture, think about your experience of picking college. Did you go on multiple campus tours? Did you ever go on a campus tour where you got somewhere and you were like, these are just not my people? Like there's just a vibe at that campus that you knew wasn't a good fit for you. This I know happened to me. I won't name the institution, but it's a great institution. You know, it's a great fit for some people, but I turned to my parents and I was like, we do not need to finish the tour. I'm not going here. And my parents were like, well, why? What's wrong with it? You know, it's this, that, and the other thing. I was like, I just know it's not for me. And when I went to the place that I did eventually go, I just felt this vibe. I knew that this was kind of the place that I would fit in. Companies are like that too. And so you're looking for it and they're also looking for it from you. So it's not just about your skills, but it's also about, will you fit in here? Will you be easy to work with? Will you fit the company culture? Because everybody's going to have a more beneficial experience if that's the case. So how do you go about preparing for an interview? I think a lot of times people are very reactive when they prepare for an interview and they get really nervous and they think about, I just have no idea what an employer will ask. So how can I possibly prepare? And they kind of go in like on their heels because they're not sure what people are going to ask. But here's the trick. You can actually predict a majority of the questions that an employer will ask, or at least the general direction that the interview will take. And if any of you play sports, think about the difference of being on your heels versus on your toes when you play sports. So personally, I play tennis, and if you hit the ball and you're on your heels, the ball goes like way sky high, probably flies over the fence and is nowhere where you want it to be. But if you hit the ball with the same stroke and you're on your toes, you have a lot of power and you have a lot of control. And so in the same way, when you prepare for interviews, you want to prepare proactively and you want to go in there on your toes instead of on your heels, because you will make a much better impression. So here are some ways that you can do that. The first thing that you should do is think about creating an about me sheet. And this should be in reference to the job. So you should take that job description, and here's a hot tip. When you apply for a job, make sure that you save the job description somewhere. Don't just save the link, because when the deadline comes, they take it offline. And if you haven't saved it, whether you screenshot it, you copy and paste it into Word, you print it out, whatever your style is, you won't be able to go back and reference it, and you really need it to prepare for an interview. So pull up your job description. I personally print them and highlight them and look at what are those skills they're asking for. Hopefully you did this when you wrote your cover letter, and when you checked your resume, maybe you wrote a summary of qualifications that was tied to these key skills. Well, now you want to translate those key things into your interview preparation. So the first thing to do is almost make a highlight reel. So think about when you watch your favorite show and they have the little trailer, you know, on Netflix, it's what, 30 seconds, 15 seconds of here's what the next episode is going to be. And then you want to keep watching because you're like, I got to see what happens in the next episode. And it's all the juiciest bits crammed together in 15 seconds. It's not the whole episode, right? It's the best parts that make you want to know what happens and how do we get to those parts. You need to have kind of this like highlight reel of the very best things that you have to offer, your top skills and experiences related to this job. And I'm going to jump ahead for a minute and tell you, this is the secret answer to tell me about yourself, okay? Tell me about yourself is actually give me your highlight reel as it relates to this position. I do not care that you have siblings. I do not care that your favorite color is green. And I do not care that you like cats, unless any of those things are related to the job description. So start with preparing this about me sheet. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to know? And keep in mind that you actually know your experience better than they do. If you've ever been on the other side and you've interviewed candidates, sometimes it's like pulling teeth and you can't get them to give you any actual examples or data, essentially. That's really painful position. And frankly, most interviewers are just going to give up and they're not going to try that hard if you don't volunteer it. So it's your job to figure out what's most relevant and be willing and able to volunteer that, connecting the dots to the job description. Now, here's another secret, going back to my sports analogy. So, you know, I was a terrible tennis player when I started. I was so bad that the coach wouldn't even let me ride the bus to away matches because it was like a waste of space. But I kept practicing and I practiced over the winter and stuff and I got better. But when you go out and you play a match, nobody expects you to learn a new stroke, right? You learn the strokes in practice. You learn your forehand, you learn your backhand. I'm still bad at volleys. You learn how to serve. And then when you go out in the match, you use whatever you know, right? You don't know where the ball's going to come from. You don't know where your opponent's going to hit it, but you know, you got a forehand, you got a backhand, you got kind of a bad volley, and you got some good footwork. And those are the tools that you have to work with in that match, no matter what comes at you. An interview is actually the same way. So what you should do is you should prepare 10 to 12 stories, and we're going to get into more detail about how you prepare those, but 10 to 12 stories that highlight you exhibiting the skills related to this job, and you should be prepared to tell those stories. And I'm going to talk a little bit about strategy, about how to actually flesh those out, but think about this as your toolbox. You have a tell me about yourself. We're going to talk about why do you want this job in this organization, and then you have 10 to 12 stories of you actually at work, and you have some questions for them. And if you have all those things in your toolbox, you shouldn't really have to go learn any new skills in the interview. You should mostly be able to work on those things that are in your toolbox. And I will tell you that some of the most prepared students I've worked with, they make these flashcards, and I have seen them sitting in lobbies with their flashcards. They got these 12 flashcards, and they just kind of flip through them. They're front of mind, and they go into the interview, and they don't have to be thinking of like, oh no, an example for that. I don't know. I'm back on my heels. The ball goes way over the fence, right? So it's all about preparation, about your skills in relation to this actual position. Now, here's the other secret. Interviews kind of follow a predictable format for the most part. For the most part, I think they're a little bit reminiscent of the 5-paragraph essay. So y'all remember back to, I don't know, what is it, middle school, high school, where you learn to write this 5-paragraph essay. So typically in the essay, the first paragraph says kind of what this essay is about. This is what I'm going to tell you. Then there's 3 supporting paragraphs that give you information about whatever that thing is. And then the concluding paragraph says, like, this is what I said and this is why it matters. Well, an interview is kind of set up the same way. So usually there's sort of this introductory period where they say, tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in organization? Why are you interested in this kind of job? That's like the introduction. Give me the big picture. Give me that highlight reel. And then they start digging in and they want some evidence of those things. Tell me some stories, like show me a picture of what that actually looks like. And those are like your supporting paragraphs of evidence about how your experience has equipped you to solve this problem for them right now. And then the conclusion is kind of like, so where do we go from here? How interested are you really? Do you have any questions for us? Tie this all up in a big bow. And most interviews are going to follow this format. Some people will go totally rogue. I can tell you some stories about totally rogue, and you just have to roll with it knowing I got a toolbox. I'm going to use the tools in my toolbox no matter what comes at me, okay? But for the most part, I would guess that you'd find 80 to 90% of interviews will follow this structure. So here are a list of some typical questions that you're going to get. I've already mentioned this, tell me about yourself. Most people hate this question. But if you know the secret, you should love this question, because if you play volleyball, I'm really not that sporty, but I got a lot of sports illustrations for interviewing. If you play volleyball, this is a set. Like, you know it's coming and you should be like, oh yeah, here comes tell me about yourself. I am ready. It does not involve your cat or your favorite color, right? It's your highlight reel of the top 3 things that you want them to know. A lot of times people like to do this in kind of a chronological way. So you might start out and say something like, my name is Katybeth, I'm a senior at VCU, and I'm focused on marketing. I'm really interested in digital content and strategy. And so I've gotten really involved in a number of ways. I'm in this student organization and I've led their marketing efforts using these platforms. I did an internship with this organization and I did these marketing things. And I've been doing a lot of reading in the field. And I think one of the most interesting things about the field is how this technology is developing in this way. And I think given those experiences and my interests, I would bring a lot of value to your team for this position. That was what, like 1 minute? It's not that long, but what it gives them is an opportunity to unpack some of those things. And they might want to know more, like, well, tell me about your student organization and what you did and what your strategy was and what was the results. Supporting evidence, right? Tell me about your internship. Tell me about that thing that you read. So they're going to dig in on that. They will always ask you, why are you interested in this company? Why are you interested in this role? You should be prepared. Now, you don't need to know every single thing about their company, but you need to know enough to differentiate them from their competitor, right? So if you're an accounting student and you say, well, I want to work here because you're one of the big 4. Womp, womp, no. You need to understand how KPMG sees itself as different than Deloitte. And you need to be able to say something intelligent about that. It doesn't have to be super long, but you need to have something to say that makes them think like you actually care about them. In some ways, this is like a date and you need to make them feel special. And then you need to be able to talk about this specific position and how your skills relate to it. Now, remember, I told you it's about them, not you. So this answer is not because I want to be successful in marketing, because I think it would be prestigious to work in the big 4. It's because I have skills and experiences that would bring value to you, right? That's why. Yes, of course you want those things too, but you're making a value proposition here to this employer. They might ask you about strengths and weaknesses. You should always be prepared. A good interview is going to disguise those questions. So like, I love to ask something along the lines of, tell me about a professional mistake you made and what you would do differently. That sometimes shows me a weakness. It's also about like kind of humility and can you admit your own mistakes and take ownership for them? But I really will say, tell me your weakness. Now here's another secret about that one. Never, ever, ever say, oh, my weakness is I'm a perfectionist. Has it hurt you? Has that actually hurt you? The question is about your own level of self-awareness. We all have things that we're not good at. And I want to know as a supervisor, are you managing those things or do you expect me to manage those things? So don't tell me it's something core to the job. And for real, I've been in an interview for a communications position where someone told us their weakness was communication. That's not a good strategy. That person did not move forward in the interview. However, you want to pick something that's real and that you have some sort of coping mechanism in place for. So for instance, maybe you're not naturally very good at being on time, and you've learned this, and it's hurt you, right? You've missed deadlines, it's impacted your grades, or you've gotten feedback from an employer, this is really a problem. And so you've realized, I gotta own this, and I gotta figure out a way to make this not a liability. And so you become religious about setting reminders and alarms in your phone, and you always have your phone on you. And so while you're not naturally timely, you now have created a system in your phone where you show up on time, gosh darn it. I would love that example as an employer, because it shows me you have self-awareness and self-management, and that is what I'm looking for. Career goals, you don't need to have like a fully fleshed out plan. They just want to know you're generally headed in the same direction they are. So if you say, well, my real goal is to apply to grad school in some totally different field in a year, not a good answer, right? If you think I'd really like to get an MBA in 3 years when I have relevant experience, that might be relevant to that role, and that might be actually a great fit for how the progression in that industry or that organization would work. But you should do your research and make sure you know that that's kind of going in the same direction that they're going, and they want to know that you're motivated. Bryan, you want to jump in?
And one thing here, and we have a lot to get to, so we'll move on, but it's important for you to protect yourself in this, right, with career goals. You don't know where things are going to go. So you might have the plan that for a year, I'm going to study, get my grades up, something like that, and then go get a master's. But you could fall in love with that company and really enjoy it if you get the shot. But if you tell them, hey, I want to get my MBA, I want to get it now, and be really honest about that, you might not get the shot to see if you really like that company. So it's important to realize, like, your plans can change. So protect yourself, get that job, see where it goes, and you might not actually do what you thought you were going to do in the first place. So make sure you have in mind that you're protecting yourself through being honest, yet not telling them everything.
That's a great point. Yeah, you want to kind of keep your options open in some ways. We're going to talk about behavioral interviews, and I'm going to go to the next slide, but I'm going to ask you, while I'm talking about this, if you have any interview questions that you've gotten that have either been the hardest or the best that you really love, go ahead and put those in the chat box for other people to see. So when you get these behavioral questions, which are all the questions that are tell me about a time when you, there's a strategy that you should use to prepare for that. And we call it the STAR technique, which is situation, task, action, and result. And essentially, it's just how to tell a good story. So you probably all know somebody who's a great storyteller, and you know somebody who's a terrible storyteller, right? So the essence of a good story is somebody can feel like they were there. They know enough detail for it to be vivid and for them to imagine it. There's a punchline, right? There's a result, there's something that happens, but it doesn't go on and on and on forever. So typically, most of your interview answers are going to be 2 to 3 minutes. And you should practice this. You should time yourself so that you get sort of a muscle memory of how much content it takes to go into 2 to 3 minutes. Couple of like common errors that I typically see people make. So often people will either kind of set up the situation, here's where I was and what was happening, and here's what I was supposed to do, and here was the result. And they don't give any of the action steps. Think about action as like when you have to show your math. Remember how in math class you don't get credit if you don't show how you got from the beginning to the end? That's the same in a behavioral interview question. So they want to know, how did you get from A to B to C to D to this result? But not in excruciating detail. And that's sort of the other end of the continuum where people go wrong. Some people get really hung up in like every teeny tiny action step, and then they're like, oh man, I've been going on too long, and they sort of awkwardly stop and they never even say what happened in the end. So you need to tie it up and you need to confidently stop, because they're not going to stop you unless you're absolutely flaming out. So you need to know, here's the end and I'm going to stop here. And your results should be positive. This to me seems very obvious, but I have heard people who will tell you this whole story and then the end is like some terrible ending that does not make them look good. That's not the story you want. So when you're doing that toolbox preparation and you're starting to think about stories, think about class projects, think about jobs, think about student organizations, a variety of experiences, look through those skills that are in the job and ask yourself, how could I tell a story that shows I have that skill? Now, most of you probably do not remember, in the old days, we had these things called overhead projectors, where you would, Laura remembers, where you had this clear transparency and your teacher would like draw whatever it was and it would project it up on the wall. This was before we all had like PowerPoints and projectors. What your interviewer is doing is essentially drawing a picture on this overhead projector transparency, and they're projecting it onto this job. And they're asking you, will this fit? So they're imagining you acting in the way that you acted in this certain situation on their job. And they're saying, would this go well? And so you need to kind of imagine forward what that might look like for this job and make sure that you're providing evidence that would be a good fit in that way. The reason, so something like 80 to 90% of Fortune 500 companies use behavioral interviewing as a strategy because your past behavior is the best predictor of your future behavior. So really ineffective question to ask somebody, what do you think makes a good leader? Because they could say anything they want, but it doesn't mean that they would exhibit those behaviors. But if you say, tell me about a time you took a leadership role, what did you do to get your group to accomplish a task? And you go through this and you say, here was my situation, here's what we had to accomplish, here are the things I did as a leader, and here was the result of a group. I can draw on my little overhead projector imagination and say, okay, if you acted like that in this group, in this job, in this organization, that would be great. Check, on to the next question. So that's kind of your goal. I want you to also practice this sort of imagining. So this is that job description that we looked at last week. You should be able to imagine a lot of the questions that they would ask you by looking at the job description. So as you look at this job description, pretend you're the hiring manager and you're going to ask some tell me about a time questions, some behavioral interview questions to figure out if somebody has the skills that you need for this business development manager. And use the chat box here and type in a question that you would ask somebody to try to elicit some of the skills that are in this job description. All right, so we've got one here. What do you think is the most important thing in a sales report? So that one is kind of like a hypothetical question, and it's in some ways it's more of like a technical knowledge question. So that's a great point. We haven't talked about that section of questions yet, but likely you will have some questions that will test your technical knowledge in your field. And this is a good example. You know, do you really know what's in a sales report? Do you know what's most important to be looking at? Now, if we were to kind of convert this into a behavioral interview question, which is a tell me about a time, maybe they would ask something like, tell me about a time that you had to persuade someone about something. Maybe you had to sell them something. Maybe you wanted to change their mind about something or get someone to buy into your idea. Tell me about a time that you persuaded someone. What did you persuade them and what was your strategy? That would be kind of interesting if I was looking for someone who was good at sales. You know, how do they sort of get in the mind of a customer? How do they think about a customer's needs? Are they going to be effective at persuasion? So I think both of those are important parts and certainly are questions that could be asked in this interview. Any other ideas? Tell me about a time that you developed marketing or communication materials for internal or external constituents. That's a good one. So we can see in here that this person is supposed to be developing, and it's probably buried in here somewhere, be clear and concise in all communications, both internal and external. So have they done that before? And how do they think about internal versus external constituents? You know, do they know the basic principles of marketing and communication, and how would they apply them? It's a great one. What strategies would you use to increase sales during a stay-at-home order? So relevant, Sambo, thank you. So, you know, perhaps they might pick on something recent and current in the news, and that's certainly true. So this, I would say, would be another kind of technical question of what strategies do you know about particular to this current situation? And that would make me wonder, like, how much have you been reading in your industry publications or blogs or other areas to see what are people doing, what's working well? Another one that you might ask is, tell me about a time that you had to like develop new customers or find new customers, whether it be for recruiting members for your student organization, or it could be you know, selling ice cream down by the seashore or whatever. And remember, in these questions, they don't expect you, for the most part, especially if you're a new grad, to have examples that are in a professional workplace or in a job exactly like this. They just want to know that you have the skill and that that skill could translate to this job. The other thing to keep in mind as you're developing your sort of deck of questions is to try to give examples that show your diversity of experiences. So if you find you're only ever giving examples showing one thing you did and you're not talking about some other really valuable experiences, you might want to try to diversify so that they know about these different contexts and types of experiences that you've been in. So these are great. Thank you everyone for contributing to those. The last element of an interview that's really important, and I think sometimes goes overlooked, is at the end, they always say, do you have any questions for us? This is actually not optional. The wrong answer is no. Never, ever say that. Because imagine yourself on a date, and I have personally been in this situation where the other person never asks you anything about yourself. Do you feel like they're that into you? I went out with this guy once, it was a long time ago, but it's still clear in my mind because he talked about himself the entire time. And I was so over it that I basically had like stopped talking, and we were driving home and he said, there's this long awkward silence. And then he said, well, you haven't asked me anything about me. It's like, because you've been talking about yourself the whole time. And in many ways, in an interview, you do most of the talking, right? You're talking about yourself and your experiences, and you're presenting that. But they kind of want to turn too. And so the questions are your way to show how interested you actually are. Have you thought about yourself together? Have you thought about yourself in this company? What questions does that bring to mind? So I'd love for you all to pop in some questions to the chat box of things that you like to ask in an interview. I'll tell you, the ones you don't want to ask are the things that are like obviously on their website. So what do you do? Not a good question, right? But you want to ask some questions that kind of take it to the next level. And often I think it's very helpful to ask questions that only somebody who works there would know, or might be like a personal perspective question, and multiple people in the room might give you different perspectives. That can be really useful too. Let's see, where'd my chat box go? There it is. Sambo, this is a great question. So Sambo jumped right to the end. How long will it take for you to get back to me? Or another way to ask that is, what are our next steps? So that is a question you should always, always ask at the end, because it's kind of like saying like, this was really fun, I'd like to go out again. And if nobody says that at the end of the date, like you kind of think, this is gonna stop here, right? But if you would like to hear from them, you kind of want to express that by asking a question about what are the next steps, or when can I expect to hear from you? Sometimes they go ahead and they share that with you, but oftentimes it's sort of your way to end the question asking section. This is a great one too, Sophia. What is the environment like in the office? You can't find that on a website, right? So describe your team, describe a company culture, describe the environment of an office. That's a great thing to ask. How do different positions interact in this position? That's a great question. What's one of your favorite initiatives taking place in the organization? I love that. So sometimes it might be new and it might not even be on the website, or it gives you a sense of like what this team might be particularly excited about or committed to. These are great. So you should always prepare a list of questions. You should be able to ask 3. if you have time. Sometimes they'll say, oh, we're out of time, we only have time for one question or something like that. But you should be prepared to ask 3 to 5 questions, which means you should probably brainstorm a list of like 5 or 8 questions, because sometimes they give you a little spiel at the beginning and they answer some of your questions. And then here's another little secret. You should never work off your notes during an interview. You shouldn't pull out a pad of paper and open it up and be referencing it. But questions is the one exception. And you can pull out your pad of paper and say, you know, I actually prepared some, and open it up, and it makes you look super prepared. You don't have to waste your brain space on remembering the questions, and you can make sure you actually ask the things you really care about. So that's the exception to the rule, and you're actually able to reference your own list. Brian, this is another great one. Is there anything about my experience that I could clarify for you? This is a nice opportunity in case they're kind of like, ooh, I don't know about this thing, but they just haven't like prodded, and they say, well, you know what, we're just not sure you have enough experience with X. Can you tell us any more about that? And then you're able to be like, oh, well, you know, I didn't actually get to share this thing that's related to it, right? Top 3 priorities you'd like me to accomplish in the first 30 days. That's a great one, Rochelle, because it makes me think you are imagining yourself here, and you are imagining yourself like going in the first 30 days. So that is awesome. These are a great list of questions. Thank you, everybody, for sharing these. And then the last piece I wanted to talk about in sort of preparation for your interview in this virtual environment is the sort of nuts and bolts and the format, right? So many of us have had these lovely Zoom interactions a lot lately. And so you gotta test your technology. And one thing that's really important is check your lighting. So you want the light in front of you, not behind you. If the light is behind you, you'll be backlit and your face will be really dark and it's hard for people to see you. So make sure that you're in a place where, like I have a window over here, so the light is coming in front of me. Make sure that your sound is okay. I find that I get much better sound quality when I use like earphones with a mic or a headset. If you have that, that's great. If you don't, make sure that you can shut the door somewhere and that people know not to interrupt you so that your sound will be all right. Make sure that your setting looks good. Zoom has these lovely virtual backgrounds if your computer supports it, which is nice because then it doesn't really matter what it looks like behind you. But if not, you know, find something that looks professional. And so make sure that it's not, you know, your dirty laundry or dirty dishes in the sink. I had a call recently with a vendor who was trying to sell me something, and he was wearing a hoodie, and he was like in the kitchen, and there were all these dirty dishes piled in the sink, and like someone kept coming and going and like making a snack in the kitchen. Did not make a very professional impression on me. Make sure that you're dressed appropriately. We're going to talk about that quickly. And then make eye contact. This part is so hard because, you know, the camera is like up here and it's not naturally where you look. But if you can, like if you're on Zoom or another format and you can move the person's little bubble as close to your camera as possible, that's going to make you look like you're looking at them. Make sure you don't have another screen and you keep like looking over here at the other screen, because then it looks like you're not engaged in the conversation. And if things go wrong, do your best. So I recently participated in an interview and the person's internet connection was terrible, and they just kept like freezing up and getting kicked off, and they were giving like a presentation and they would get like 2 slides and then it would happen again, and there were like 8 people on this call, and it was a really stressful situation for her, obviously, and it was kind of frustrating, honestly, for us. But she was really poised and professional. She did her best. She apologized, but not like too much. You know, she eventually ended up having to phone in because the internet was just such a mess. She had to send her slides to somebody else ahead of or in the middle because she couldn't share her screen. So think about things you could do if things were to go wrong. You know, send your slides ahead of time if you were to have to do a presentation, or have a phone nearby in case you needed to use a dial-in option. And then know a lot of that is out of your control. And what they're judging you for is not that it's happening, but how you respond to it. And so take a deep breath and do your best, and know that there's a lot of life outside of our control, as I think we're all very well aware right now. All right, I think Sambo had a quick comment. Let me read this. So Bryan, would you be willing to unmute Sambo, and will you give us just what you wanted to contribute here about kind of the value of honesty in the interview and how that has opened up opportunities?
Yes, so thank you so much. I've really loved this series, and I've noticed you've been recording. I'm like, is she going to share this with us? But you don't have to. So I just wanted to talk about being honest in an interview, and how even if when you notice something and you feel like, wait a minute, is this really what I want? You can just say it because you just don't know, you know. So a few years ago, I went to attend an interview. They'd advertised that they needed a part-time accountant. So I am an accountant, and I was like, this is interesting. And part-time in my interpretation, because I previously had a part-time accounting job, I used to work on Saturday, just some hours on Saturday. And that's how I thought this job was going to be like. And then I get there, and they're thinking about part-time being working on Monday, a few hours, Wednesday, a few hours, and Friday. So, and they did not communicate that in the advert that they'd put in the paper, and they didn't even say it at the start of the interview. So we start, and I'm answering these questions, and I feel like, oh, I'm nailing this. And then, you know, they say, so in terms of the times that you have to work, you will have to work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'm like, oh, okay. Midway through the interview, I said, I'm so sorry. I guess I have to leave. Can we call off this interview now? Because in my mind, this is what I thought part-time was. Then they look at me and they say, that's so honest. And I'm like, I don't want to waste your time, because my understanding was that I would have a role to play in deciding when that part-time would be. But clearly, you want somebody to work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And currently I can't do that because I have a job for which I need to work those days. But Saturday I can do the work, and, you know. So then they said, oh, okay. You know what? You have been very honest with us. We've had a number of people come in here for this interview, and nobody has actually said that that kind of arrangement cannot work in our environment. We're talking about in Africa here. When you're in Africa, you don't get a job. You don't get two jobs for you to switch. You just get one job and you stay in that job. So then they say, we never really thought about this. We may have to change the whole thing. We may have to actually provide a position for somebody who will be there from Monday to Friday. But you know what? These first few minutes that we have had with you, we feel like you'd be best suited for another job. Can we call you in to come for an interview when this job becomes available? I looked at them and I smiled. I said, oh, sure. You know, so they called me to go in for that other job, and they said, oh, they referred to the previous interview and how honest I was. And then we just had this interesting conversation. It was one of the amazing interviews I've attended in my life. And they gave me the job, and I ended up traveling to more than 20 countries in this new job that I needed to work now from Monday to Friday. So being honest when you're in an interview is really important. I know that when you're just graduating from school, if this is going to be your real first job, there are lots of issues at play, and you can feel like, oh, you know, if they say something that you don't really agree with, then you may try to navigate that space properly. But to be honest and to speak your truth in an interview as you go up in your career, it's very important.
I think that's so important, Sambo. Thank you. And it's mutually beneficial, right? Because you want to be in a situation that you both want to be in. And so some people will kind of present this image of themselves that's not accurate, and then they get hired for that image and they expect you to be like that the whole time. That's really exhausting, and often it's not very successful. And so to be honest about your skills and your experiences and what you're able to do means that usually you'll end up with a much better fit when you find something that matches that. So thank you for sharing that experience. At this point, I just wanted to mention briefly that even in a virtual interview environment, you should dress professionally. I know some people say, oh, you can still wear like your yoga pants and slippers on the bottom. Personally, I would not do that, because what if something goes haywire with your technology and you got to stand up and go somewhere and then they see you wearing your pajama pants? I don't think that's a great strategy. Also, you feel a lot more professional and you convey yourself more professionally. So I would even say if it's a phone interview, you should still dress nicely, because you're going to convey a different level of professionalism than if you're wearing your pajamas. So if you have any questions about attire, certainly your coach can talk to you about that. But in short, still dress professionally because you'll convey yourself more professionally. So I want to pivot, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but this is such an important concept. And Bryan, I think if you would launch our poll, I want you all to tell us, why do you network? And we've got some options on here. So is it because you're trying to get kind of an in with the company, fostering internal referrals? Is it to kind of have a better sense of like what kind of job or company would be a good match for you? Kind of like doing a campus visit, teaching you the language of the industry or the organization, to make your job search more effective, or to build professional connections. And you can answer any of these that are relevant for you. And these are all valid reasons. Just kind of curious, out of your perspective, which are the reasons that really motivate you? So it looks like, I'm going to go ahead and end it, that, you know, the top ones are to foster internal referrals and build professional contacts. And those are really important reasons. You're so much more likely to get an interview and move forward in a job search process if you know somebody at that company. And it's both because some companies have structures where they actually can sort of bump you to the head of the class and you're more likely to get an interview if you have an internal referral, but also it's because you probably put together a better job application if you know someone at the company who's helped you understand what this job does in that company and what they're actually looking for. So you guys nailed it as usual. And here's, you know, a whole series of reasons to network. And the thing about networking is that it's about relationship, both creation, but also maintenance, development and maintenance. And it's not mostly about meeting strangers. It's about making connections, sometimes like a 1 degree separated from you, but more often than not, it's people that you actually already know. And a lot of times you're sort of surprised at how those things develop into something that actually helps you professionally. So I wanted to pull a quick example and show you how some of the tools available can help you broaden your network and how you might use those specifically while you're job searching. So I looked up to make sure I say this right. So Mondelez International is a food and beverage company. And the reason I picked them for this example is because they currently have 20 jobs posted for VCU students in Handshake. They are currently hiring. Food and beverage is actually still doing pretty well in this. That's one area. People are spending more money on groceries right now. And so they're hiring. They've got a lot of opportunity. So I pulled up Mondelez in both LinkedIn and in Handshake to see, do I know anybody who works at those companies? And you can see here, these are little screenshots from my LinkedIn, that there are a couple of people here, 3 people who are 2nd degree connections at Mondelez. And they're a project manager, an operations section leader, and human resource business partner. So depending on what kind of job I was looking for, you know, that would sort of help me pick. But I decided that this guy right here, Bryan Nabel, he's a human resource business partner. He's probably the closest to recruiting. And so I thought he would be the one I would probably want to talk to about recruiting and what they're looking for and how I could kind of be strategic in my application for one of these jobs. And I'm going to show you in a minute the sort of email that I might send him if I reached out to him to set up a time to chat. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that you can actually look up both reviews of companies and also interview tips within Handshake. So this is a little screenshot. If you go into Handshake and you look up Mondelez International, you'll see there's 16 reviews, and these are from students all over the country who've worked for Mondelez. And also, if you were to have clicked on this little interview, there's 15. They tell you what they asked in the interview. So they will tell you, okay, these are the questions they asked. This was, you know, one thing that I would recommend you do or prepare for. So that's really helpful. And you can also reach out to people via Handshake who have listed their experiences to ask them more about it. So if you're applying for an internship at Mondelez, maybe you would want to reach out to Madison and ask her more about her experience and her tips for the recruitment process. But let's say that I decide to reach out to Bryan, who's the human resource partner. He's in the Richmond area, and we have this common connection. So Aaron McClung is somebody I worked at a previous job. So I know him, and apparently Bryan also knows him. And LinkedIn's amazing because it tells me that, right? So I don't have to just go around asking, does anybody know anybody who works at Mondelez? LinkedIn tells me, You know someone, Aaron knows somebody who works at Mondelez. You just need to connect the dots. So this is from the 2-Hour Job Search book that I referenced earlier. And this is an example. He calls it a 5-point email, but the sort of email that you might send to somebody who you don't know, but you probably have some mutual connection and you want to learn something from them. And it should be short. Nobody wants to read a long email. You want to have the conversation. That's what you're going for. So less than 100 words. You should not mention jobs anywhere. So you're not asking, can you get me a job? You're asking for advice and for insight from this person that's going to help you get the job. You want to lead with the connection. So they're like, oh, well, of course I know Aaron. Aaron's great. If you know Aaron, maybe you're great too. And then you want to kind of keep your interest general so that they feel like they can contribute to it. People like to respond to an ask that they know they can succeed in. If you make the ask too specific or too aspirational and they're like, I don't think I can deliver, they're much less likely to respond to you. And then you want to maintain some control of the follow-up so that you don't end up kind of harassing them, but it's like you're delivering on what you said that you would do. So this is just an example. You know, I might say who I am, that I'm at VCU, and that we have this common connection. And I'm asking for 20 minutes to ask about your experience with Mondelez. I'm interested in learning more about food and beverage because I know they're hiring during COVID, and your interest would be helpful. I know this might be a busy time, so if we're unable to connect, I'll try to reach out next week. That's also another way to say that is, like, if you don't reply to me, I'm going to email you again and consider yourself warned. And so this is short and sweet and to the point. Not everyone will reply, but the people who reply genuinely want to help you. And many of us have had experiences where people have done this for us in the past. And so I do informational interviews every year. Random people reach out to me because we have some mutual connection. And, you know, when I can, I say yes, and I do an informational interview. And I hope it's helpful because I've actually gotten probably 3 jobs because of informational interviewing, including this one. So what is an informational interview? It's basically where you get to ask somebody for information that will help you know more about whatever it is you're learning. It's not always for job search. Sometimes it's for other things. But in total, it might take you about 50 minutes per interview because you should do some research ahead of time. So you should know like how to say Mondelez, and you should know generally what they do, but you do not need to be an expert in the company because that's why you're talking to this person. They're the expert. You just need to know enough to not look like an idiot, right? So just kind of Google them, read the about us, make sure you have a general sense. 15 minutes, set your timer. That's all you need to do. And then 30-minute conversation, be mindful of the time. If you've asked for 20 minutes or you've asked for 30 minutes, don't go on for an hour. Pace yourself. But this is again from the Dalton book, the 2-Hour Job Search book. He recommends using this Tiara format: trends, insights, advice, resources, and assignments to come up with some interesting questions. There's lots of places you could look up questions for informational interviews, but these are some ideas. And frankly, as someone who has done a lot of informational interviews on both sides, like these are interesting questions. These are things I would actually enjoy talking about, and I feel like would give somebody interested in my field more insight than just like, tell me what you do each day. So prepare yourself a list of questions because you're the one running the interview. Know that there's usually some warm up getting to know you, but you know, kind of prioritize the things you want to ask and then send them a thank you. They did you a favor, right? They gave you half an hour of their time. It makes you look very professional to send them a thank you. And you can use that to emphasize any key points you want them to remember. Now, one of my favorite strategies with informational interviewing is I think about it kind of like leapfrog. So if you have one person that you can reach out to, but in your interview, you ask them if they could recommend one person, then you'll keep going, right? That's how leapfrog works. You jump over one person at a time. So you don't need to have 20 people to start with. You need one good person who gives you another person. So one of my questions is always, can you recommend somebody who could share more about this particular thing we've talked about? So maybe it's you really liked talking to this HR person because they gave you a big picture of Mondelez, but actually you're in accounting and you would like to talk to someone in their accounting department. You could say to Bryan, this has been so insightful. I've really enjoyed learning about Mondelez. Do you have any colleagues in the accounting department that might be able to tell me more about that functional area within your business? If he gives you a name, you're good to go and you keep going. And this process is unbelievably beneficial in your job search. So I mentioned to you all that I have gotten multiple jobs using this strategy. When I was a grad student, I did this the summer before I was graduating. I knew I wanted to be in Virginia. I just wrote 4 vice presidents of student affairs at 4 colleges in the region. Every single one of them wrote me back and met with me. I didn't know them from Adam. And I realized in those interviews that I wanted to work at 2 of those schools, and I really didn't want to work at 2 of those schools. And over the course of the next year, jobs came up at both of those schools, and they had both introduced me to their career center directors. And so I was a known entity when the job search came open, and I actually got offers at both of those schools, and it all came out of informational interviewing. And then for this job that I'm in right now, I had met somebody who is now my boss, but I had met her through some common acquaintances and civic organizations. She had actually come to me first because she needed information about something that I'd been a part of that she was now a part of. And we graduated from the same college, and I just thought, she's really smart, she's really driven, she's really strategic, I liked her. And so I reached out to her and asked to have coffee with her to talk about another common interest. And so we had a coffee a couple of times before this opportunity came up. And again, I was a known entity, I'd been proactive, we had mutual respect for each other and opened up this opportunity. So I am telling you from personal experience, this really works. It is a long-term strategy, but it really works. And we're here to support you in it. So I really encourage you to make this a part of your job search plan. So a couple of next steps as we wrap up here. First of all, complete the evaluation. Please give us feedback. We would love to know it was helpful, any additional topics that you'd like more information about. And then I would really encourage you to make a job search plan with a timeline. Treat this like your job. If you're job searching, you need to have stuff that you're working on each day. Maybe it's you're gonna do a LinkedIn search and send out a couple of emails for hoping to set up an informational interview. Maybe it's you're tailoring your documents to apply to this job that's just popped up. Maybe it's you're meeting with your career coach this day to really fine tune your plan. But make sure that you have a timeline. It does take work, but you can do it. And I would strongly recommend to find kind of like a job search buddy or an accountability partner, somebody else who's also job searching, because sometimes it can be discouraging or can feel overwhelming. And it is so nice to have somebody who understands because they're in it. They might be feeling up today and you're feeling down, and they can encourage you, and then the tables reverse and you can do the same thing for them next week. Your career coach can serve in that role. So we are here for you. We will serve you after graduation and beyond. There's no limit to when you can come and work with career coaches and business career services. We work all summer. We're going to continue to be virtual. So we know many of you are finishing up finals and looking forward to your virtual graduations. But if you are still job searching, please reach out to us. We would love to help you. You have great skills that are meant to meet needs in the workplace, and employers need you. They still need talent. You just have to be strategic about it. So we're here to support you. And I'll stick on the line for any additional questions. But at this point, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Hey, KB.
Hello.
I'm